Are you ever playing through a game, and for whatever reason, you get the itch to check out the series wiki, only to accidentally spoil yourself on the game you're currently playing through? And it's not just any spoiler, it's the game's biggest spoiler that completely warps how you view the story, and it kinda ruins your playthrough because of it. So, Danganronpa 2. I feel very confident in saying it's the fan favorite of the series. At least that's the impression I get from all the opinions I've seen online throughout the years. Which is honestly very fair, because compared to the rest of the series, Danganronpa 2 doesn't exactly have that one major flaw you could easily point to. Danganronpa 1 is a bit simple, you can tell it's the first in the series. Ultra Spur Girls, some would say, is plain garbage. Same with the Danganronpa 3 anime, and V3 has its controversial ending. Therefore, it may come as a surprise for me to say that Danganronpa 2 is in fact my least favorite out of the 3 main games. A part of that is just me really enjoying Danganronpa 1 and V3, but the biggest reason why is my little anecdote I just brought up, which really did take away most of the impact of me going through Danganronpa 2 that first time. As I continued going through the series, and as the years went by, Danganronpa 2 was my personal black sheep of the series that I kinda ruined for myself. I still liked the game, but I really hated that I wasn't able to fully appreciate its story. But for the second playthrough, that didn't matter anymore. Now, I knew everything that was going to happen, and with this perspective, I could go into it with a different lens. Instead of being so focused on how the story would end up at the point I spoiled myself on, I could now spend more time appreciating all the other things this game does. Because while I may still like Danganronpa 1 more, I think everyone can agree that Danganronpa 2 is a straight improvement in almost every way. Speaking of that first game, this part of the cover art right here specifically, don't make the same mistake I did and spoil yourself if you care at all about playing it, since I'm about to spoil the out of it in just a few moments. Same with Danganronpa 2, I would suggest clicking away now if you want to play it for yourself. I'll just give you a couple moments to click away if you need the extra time. I had a little bit planned for this little portion of the video, but it took too long, so now you just get me awkwardly standing here until I cut to the next clip. So as we all know, Junko, the big bad mastermind behind plummeting the entire world into chaos, has been killed, and thus we only have 6 students left from Hope's Peak Academy. That first game led us to believe that Makoto, Kyoko, Byakuya, Toko, Aoi, and Yasuhiro were the only students left from this once prestigious school. If you want to continue this as a franchise, you kinda dug yourself into a hole there if you want to keep this whole classmates killing each other thing. But no, Mr. Danganronpa himself, Kazutaka Kodaka, and the rest of his team at Spike Chunsoft had other ideas, which is how Danganronpa 2 gets to exist. Okay, so way earlier in production, this was originally going to be the part of the video I would cut to me being at the beach, but I realized that driving over an hour to film on location just for this bit wasn't exactly a smart idea, so I'm not doing that. But just because I'm not on location doesn't mean I can't dress for the occasion. Look, the game takes place at the beach. I own this. I might as well wear it, okay? It's fun, it's quirky, it fits with the video, it fits with the theme. So, you know, just because it's March doesn't mean I can't pretend that it's summer. And with how hot it is outside here in Texas, it might as well be summer. But yeah, Danganronpa 2 now takes place at a beautiful tropical resort. Ironically, quite the opposite of Galveston, Texas, so more reason for me to not have gone. Now, here is where I bring up today's word of the day: expectations. If this were some fancy video essay channel that's just pretentious enough for me to find annoying, I'd title this video, "How Danganronpa 2 Plays With Your Expectations," or something like that. I'm not doing that. Except I kinda am, since I realize it can work as a loose framing device for this review. For starters, you can't tell me that upon finishing Danganronpa 1, you were expecting the sequel to be set in a tropical archipelago of all places. The game does eventually reveal why the setting of all things, and where all these new students came from for that matter, but for those early chapters especially, you may be left scratching your head. On the topic of the game's setting, one of my favorite things about Danganronpa 1, which frankly is missing here, is that oppressive atmosphere of Hoshi Academy. Compare that Backrooms-esque setting to being at the beach, Danganronpa 2 loses some charm for me right off the bat. Though it could be said there's something extra disturbing about the juxtaposition of having all this death take place at what's supposed to be a nice resort. Besides the new setting, there's another X factor at play here that immediately differentiates Danganronpa 2 from its predecessor, which is Usami/Nanami. Instead of Monokuma, you're first introduced to Usami, who's all about love and friendship, that cute, wholesome, borderline cheesy shit that feels very out of place. While her intentions are seemingly quite in good faith, even once Monokuma hijacks the show from her, the students never really trust, or even like her for that matter. In fact, they're quite antagonistic and dismissive of her, which always makes me sad because I really like Monami. I don't care about Monokuma. I want a Monami plush. That's what I want. I'm curious how other people felt about her, if they thought she was to be trusted, or she was just putting up a front. At least for those first hours, as it is eventually made quite clear, she is on your side in some way. As much as I dislike the students bullying their poor teacher, I can't really blame them considering how this game starts. One minute you think you're at school, the next you're at the beach, and there's weird talking animals telling you to not worry about it and to just have a good time. Yeah, no, sorry lady, I'd also be pretty worried if I were in this scenario. All of this aside, the rest of the setup to Danganronpa 2 will feel pretty familiar if you played the first game. You meet your classmates, explore around, Monokuma shows up to make you kill each other, so you get to leave. If there is one other thing I want to mention about the game's intro, it's these giant robots Monokuma controls that make quite the entrance, and you think they're gonna be plot relevant, but they aren't. They do jack the entire game, since they're reserved for the crappy Monami side game I'll talk about later. Before I go into the rest of the story and get maybe a bit too analytical with it, I do want to first discuss trials, as it is where new improvements are most apparent. While investigations are a copy and paste from last time, trials have received a major overhaul, and for good reason. In my last video, I said how they're the best parts about these games, and while that's true even for Danganronpa 1, those first trials were admittedly quite simple when it came to minigame variety. Not counting the closing argument and bullet time battle, which were reserved towards the end of each trial, you only had 2 other minigames to break up a trial: non-stop debates and the Hangman's Gambit. Danganronpa 2 alleviates this by introducing 2 new games and improving 2 of the past ones. Though, it does also make some questionable changes to the other 2 previously existing games. The first new game is the Rebuttal Showdown, which can best be described as a one-on-one non-stop debate. Instead of picking out one contradiction from a pool of characters arguing, it's one character getting all up in your face, and you have to cut through their argument.
It's been nearly 3 years since I've had...
Next is Logic Dive, which is my personal favorite minigame across the entire series, if you don't count the non-stop debate. It's really just a glorified way to ask you simple questions about the case so far, but presented through this obstacle course. There's not much to it, but it's always fun when it shows up. One of the series' biggest mistakes was when they replaced it with Psyche Taxi in V3. As for the improved games, the closing argument is streamlined a bit by giving you a limited pool of choices as you fill out the comic. You can say it makes it a bit easier, I'd say it makes it less tedious. Non-stop debates now allow you to agree with your classmates' statements if they're highlighted blue. This adds an extra element to consider when deciphering the correct answer, and it makes your classmates less stupid. Last time, because you could only ever disagree with them, if your name wasn't Kyoko or Byakuya, you had to purposely write the characters to not be following what was going on so you could correct them. Since now you can agree with them to advance the trial, your classmates can be a bit smarter as to understanding what the hell is going on. It's a subtle change which I think makes these characters here a bit less annoying in that they aren't completely useless during trials. As for the questionable changes, there's a bullet time battle now rebranded as Panic Talk Action. It functions nearly identical apart from one change. Instead of choosing the correct truth bullet to end a segment, you have to correctly order the words on screen. Sometimes you will have multiple ways you can order these in a way which makes sense, which is where the infamous meat on the bone meme comes from. If you spent any time in the Danganronpa fandom, you've likely come across it. Meat on the bone is the correct answer, but the following also makes some sense. On the bone meat, bone on the meat, the bone on meat, the meat on bone. I don't blame you if you were stuck in this part. And then we have Hangman's Gambit, the improved version apparently. It now involves matching pairs of letters as they fly across the screen instead of simply waiting for the right letter to show up to shoot it down. This, in theory, and mostly in practice, increases the difficulty to a fair degree while making it more engaging. That is, except for the third trial, where the difficulty spikes to such an exaggerated degree, my health nearly ran out just from this one portion. Later gambits felt appropriately difficult, so I'm not sure what happened here. With more minigames to incorporate into trials, and I guess in an effort to one-up the previous game by having all these twists and turns and crazy reveals, trials in Danganronpa 2 do become significantly longer. In the first game, the very first trial was just about an hour, with only the last crossing into the 2-hour mark. In Danganronpa 2, every trial is over 2 hours long. The length itself isn't much of an issue if the trial remains interesting all throughout. From what I can vaguely recollect of my first playthrough 5 years ago, this didn't bother me. On this second playthrough, however, I did find myself getting a bit bored towards the end of some trials, now knowing the outcomes of each of them, and as the finer details slowly poured back into memory. Trials are so long now, they all have a break at the midpoint, at which you can save and come back to if you perhaps find yourself playing Danganronpa just a bit too late at night and you should really go to bed because it's 4 AM, but this trial has taken forever and you just really want to finish it. On a first playthrough, I think it's fine, but perhaps subsequent playthroughs you may wish for these trials to go by faster. But still, I do think these trials are an overall improvement compared to the last game. The increased minigame variety makes for a more exciting experience, as you never know what's going to be thrown at you next. Returning back to the plot, I do actually want to say one thing, a bit of a personal issue actually. I don't really like my video on Danganronpa 1. I feel like people would find it boring listening to me going over all these minute plot points. And even on a creative level, I just don't find it interesting for me to write what feels like a regurgitation of a plot. So instead of doing all of that, this video will take a more general approach to the story here, like going over themes of the game, but still covering certain key plot points that are too important to go without mention, or me just covering certain details that I would find interesting to talk about. It's just been more creatively fulfilling doing this video than the last one. I just bring it up in case maybe one person is wondering why this video takes such a different approach to the last one. Now would be a good time as any to talk about our protagonist, since that's kinda important after all. At first glance, Hajime feels like a Makoto 2.0. He doesn't remember his alleged talent, and compared to mostly everyone else, he appears to be pretty normal, making him the straight man here. A normal person we the player used to view this otherwise wacky world. Same thing in Danganronpa 1. Makoto is just your average protagonist who has an admiration for all these ultimate students. As a normal person, what Hope Sweet Academy offers is completely alien to him, akin to how us players are being introduced to the world of Danganronpa for the first time. That is where the similarities end though, as you come to find out Hajime has a much different personality compared to Makoto. While Makoto is friendly almost to a fault, Hajime, for the lack of a better descriptor, feels more realistic in how he reacts to all the bullshit around him. He has a bit more bite and sass to him, which makes him a less vanilla protagonist. Even if I do like Makoto a tad bit more, which I realize is the unpopular opinion, Hajime is still a solid character that only grows more interesting as the plot progresses. It should go without mention that much like how there was a dynamic between Makoto and Kyoko in the first game, Hajime has Nagito, this time as a helper slash rival character. Like with Kyoko, even if she appeared to be a bit cold towards Makoto, you always got the feeling she was on your side. But with Nagito, even as he continues to help you out in investigations, as made abundantly clear after the first trial, he has his own agenda that doesn't exactly align with our protagonist. I bring him up this early because his entire character is emblematic of this game's story. In line with today's theme of expectations, Danganronpa 2 muddies the water of what we've come to expect about hope versus despair. In Danganronpa 1, these ideas are portrayed as a very black and white divide. If you're for hope, you're the good guys because the evil characters are all about despair. Despair is all about giving up. Why bother trying to face adversity? It's not worth it. But hope is powering through no matter what, even when times are tough.
And that is why you shouldn't try to better your life, because you might fail, so it's easier to frown! Yeah! My brothers, now the next step of our plan shall commence. You must all go and spread the word of frowning! Pretty soon, everyone will embrace sadness, and there'll be no such thing as smiling!
Danganronpa 1 presents a straightforward dichotomy. But as with all things in life, there's going to be a gray area, which is what this sequel tackles. Danganronpa 2 comes in and says, yeah, no, just cause you're for hope doesn't make you a good guy. Nagito is all about hope, but to an extremely unhealthy degree. Makoto was deemed ultimate hope because he's the world's greatest motivational speaker, and that's perfectly valid. Nagito also wants ultimate hope, but his methods of achieving that are morally questionable, which is putting it lightly. Like if he's presented with a trolley problem, he'd pull the lever that would make for a bigger tragedy because that would lead to more hope coming out of that despair. If people are able to come out stronger than before because of whatever adversity they had to face, no matter how tragic it may be, that's a win in his book. You could say it's indicative of the human spirit and our unending quest to always come out on top or some philosophical bullshit like that. Compare that to Makoto, who'd probably just find a way to stop the trolley no matter what so it doesn't kill anyone. As seen time and time again throughout the game, Nagito is willing to get his hands dirty if it means that it will somehow lead to a positive outcome through his perspective. Is hope still hope if it costs somebody's life? Or if you have to commit some crime? Or in other words, do the means justify the ends? That's my partial take on Nagito's character, and as memed on as he really is one of the most interesting characters in this franchise. He's the type of character you can make an entire video on, so if you have your own thoughts, feel free to share. But it's not just him that tackles these blurred lines between hope and despair, as we ultimately see in the game's final chapter, which I'll get to later. Danganronpa 2 being a sequel and all, retreads a lot of the same ground as last time, but to keep things fresh, twists some of those things you've come to expect in the series. Knowing the events of the first game, you know Amnesia is involved somehow. You could also expect some secret mastermind behind all this and some type of traitor. Danganronpa 2 knows this, and to not waste time keeping up the suspense, outright tells you just 2.5 hours into the game, with some shade thrown in there while it's at it. Yes, you have amnesia, yes there's a traitor amongst you, something further compounded in the following chapter, that it was a mysterious organization by the name of World Ender that placed them here. If you play the first game, you know Monokuma likely isn't lying about all this, as it is stuff you've seen by now. But since it is Monokuma, just what lie is sprinkled in there? Us having amnesia, that's not entirely the complete story here. And the thing about the traitor, that's more of a misdirection. Why would Monokuma immediately want to place suspicion on one of the students, assuming they are working alongside him like in the last game? Sakura's role as a traitor was kept secret until it was convenient to make it known, to cause discord amongst the remaining students. Knowing that, you may think that Monokuma just wants an easy way to make the students doubt and kill each other, or maybe you might think he's lying and that there is no traitor. If the game is poking fun about using tired tropes like amnesia again, maybe it won't repeat this other major plot point from last time, and that's the twist. The truth is more interesting than any of this, because Monokuma in a way was right. There is a traitor in the group, at least in the sense that this one individual has a different purpose in being here, a purpose which goes against what Monokuma wants. So I suppose if you're looking at all this from Monokuma's angle, this individual is someone you would want to antagonize. Same goes for that supposed World Ender organization he brings up in Chapter 2. Monokuma describing them as such is meant to throw the students off and think of them as the enemy. As for the player, you have to question just how truthful Monokuma is and get the mind jogging if maybe there's some twisted truth behind his words. And if all of this is being told to you so early on, surely you have to wonder just what bigger secrets this game is hiding from you. As I said in my last video, what I really love about this franchise is that big overarching mystery. It's not just about who the killer is going to be in this next chapter. It's about why you're even here in the first place, why you're here, who put you there, and how are you going to find out. Danganronpa 2 dangles all these carrots in front of you to get you thinking way earlier compared to Danganronpa 1. In fact, one large carrot is the existence of what appears to be Hope's Peak Academy there on the second island. I don't know about other people, but if I hadn't spoiled myself, my theory would have been that it was in fact Hope's Peak, but maybe a recreation of it placed on Jabberwock Island. I say recreation since we know that true Hope's Peak is in a city that's shown off several times. Considering what we saw in the first game, it doesn't feel outside the realm of possibility for Junko to have built an exact recreation of it in some remote location for whatever reason. That overwhelming light of Danganronpa 1's ending would have been that bright tropical sun beaming down on our characters. The twist would have been they were in some replica Hope's Peak far off somewhere. This, of course, isn't the case, but if you didn't know better, then it might explain why Hope's Peak is in the middle of this resort. Also, in my previous video, I alluded to how Danganronpa 2 retcons the whole you have to be an ultimate to get into Hope's Peak Academy thing, with the introduction of the Reserve Course. What is the Reserve Course? Turns out, if you have enough money, you can pay your way into becoming a student without needing some exceptional talent. Yes, you can add this to the pile of potential commentary that points to Danganronpa being one big metaphor for the education system. I feel like that's something I should go into more, but it's more deserving of its own separate video. So, just gonna ignore that for now. Anyway, in chapter 3, in the scene I used to start the video, it's basically spelled out to you that Hajime was a normie, privileged little rich boy with rich parents that paid for him to go to Hope's Peak Academy. It's not outright told to you, and Hajime still has problems remembering what all this means, but you don't have to wait long for it to get brought up again. Chapter 4 of Danganronpa 2 is my personal favorite in the game for a multitude of reasons. It may not be my favorite trial of this game, but as an overall package, I really love this chapter and I do want to take some time talking about it. I gotta talk about the funhouse. I keep bringing up that creepy dread of Hope's Peak Academy because there's something unsettling about turning what is supposed to be a safe space into a prison. The funhouse of chapter 4 takes that idea while also adding a ticking clock. Hope's Peak Academy may have been a prison, but at least prisons feed you. The motive Monokuma gives in this chapter is starvation. Someone has to kill someone unless you all want to starve to death in there. Monokuma is an evil character, duh. But it seemed like he had limits. Potentially letting all the students starve to death is somehow the cruelest thing he's done up until this point. Okay, being stuck in one place with no contact with the outside world, that obviously sucks. But if none of us agree to kill anyone, at least we have food, things to do, people to talk with, and if this goes on long enough, people to, you know. But in the funhouse, if no one is dialing M for murder, we get to see our friends slowly starve to death, or potentially go crazy enough to start considering cannibalism. That is the reality Monokuma has placed you in, and in the case of Hajime, he starts to crack and passes out.
Hey, bastard! Damn right.
This leads to what makes this chapter so famous, the portion where we play as Nagito, where we solve an escape room placed within the funhouse. Hey, quick correction I'm heading here in post. What I say makes it sound like right after you pass out as Hajime, you start playing as Nagito, but that isn't the case. You do wake up right after and begin the investigation as the murder occurs at this time. It's only once Hajime hits a dead end on his investigation that the POV changes. I think I addressed this at the very end of the video, but there was a several month gap between me finishing the game and me finishing the script, so I did forget some specific story details. I tried to correct myself the best I could before recording, but clearly I didn't do a perfect job. Just trying to address it here before someone goes, actually, 28 minutes into the video, what you said was wrong. Okay? That's it. That's all. Back to the video. The escape room that involves playing Russian roulette, which Nagito misunderstands, so we got to see him put a revolver with just one empty chamber to his head, pulls the trigger, survives, because I didn't say this earlier, he's also the ultimate lucky student. And it's not like how Makoto was the ultimate lucky student and how he got into Hope's Peak. No, with Nagito, this is basically a superpower as we see throughout the game, especially in chapter 5. As cool as it is to change POV, the escape room also deserves some credit for being a fun change of pace that I remember having far more trouble with in my first go around. For the second playthrough, I was able to figure it out without any help, except this part with the flashing lights. I had to break out the pen and paper to try and make some sense of the code before I gave up and looked up the answer. Turns out I was just misreading how the dots had to be interpreted, so I was pretty close to figuring it all out. Nagito's reward for clearing the funhouse might as well be the Danganronpa wiki, in that it gives the entire backstory for all the students there, including how Hajime has no talent, which he wastes no time to break the news. Upon learning all this, he strangely becomes quite antagonistic towards his classmates. Up until this point, because of his obsession with hope and ultimates, he looked up to his classmates as he saw them as something above him, shining examples of what humanity can accomplish in contrast to how he saw himself in an extremely self-deprecating way due to him not having a true talent. Unhealthy, yes, but that's just who he is. So what exactly did he learn to cause such a 180? To backtrack a bit, in chapter 3, Mikan, due to plot reasons, gets something called the remembering disease. Upon being afflicted, she remembers her time back in Hope Speed Academy and someone she refers to as her beloved. This directly leads to her killing Ibuki and Hiyoko, the latter of which was incredibly deserved, by the way. Like, fuck you, Hiyoko. All my homies hate Hiyoko, Rebozo. But what I'm getting at, and what I think the game wanted you to do, was to connect this with what Nagito ends up learning. Just what was Mikan's past, and what does it potentially have to do with everyone else here? One last thing before I'm obligated to talk about why the Chapter 5 trial is so goated. The Chapter 4 trial is also pretty good. TLDR, a Gundam was the culprit, and his reasoning for it is honestly kind of valid. Like, okay, go off, King, spit your Basically, he killed Nekomaru, who at this point was turned into a robot and really should have been dead already, because killing someone was better than all of them slowly wasting away in the funhouse, starving to death. This ties to a larger point on how Danganronpa 2 plays around with how it depicts all the culprits here. In Danganronpa 1, it was usually pretty clear cut. This person killed another because of this specific selfish motive, and they are solely to blame. Only in chapter 4 does Aoi try and twist this by saying everyone else is arguing pushed Sakura to commit suicide, therefore placing the blame on them. But in Danganronpa 2, chapter 1 has Nagito aiding Teruteru, but only the latter could be deemed guilty. Chapter 2, Peko killed Mahiru for Fuyuhiko's sake, but again only she could be found guilty. Chapter 3 doesn't do this actually. Man, this trial kinda sucks. Chapter 4, a Gundam more or less killed for the sake of the greater good for everyone else. And in chapter 5, Chiaki was deemed guilty even if she unknowingly killed Nagito. An extra layer has been added as to why and how the killings happened, which make these trials more interesting than those of the first game, at least conceptually. Chapter 4 trial is pretty good. There's more here I didn't go over, but yeah, Chapter 5 trial is the fan favorite for a reason. How do I explain all this without it getting too convoluted? So basically, Nagito finds out everyone is ultimate despair, including himself, except for one person, them being the traitor. A talk with Monokuma confirms that one of the student profiles was a fake, so as to not immediately give away who the traitor is, but Nagito has a way to single them out. Since they're all despair, then this traitor would represent hope, and thus Nagito would want them to live. The way he guarantees their survival is by creating an unsolvable murder. Therefore, the students can decide on who did it. Therefore, everyone but the traitor is executed. And he uses his ultimate luck to make it so the traitor is the one that grabs the poison grenade that ultimately kills them. Why is there a poison grenade? Nagito starts a fire that has to be put out by fire grenades that I guess he expected his classmates to know about. So he loaded one of them with poison, which is the one he bet on the traitor grabbing. No one can figure it out, everyone dies, the traitor, that being Chiaki, gets to go on and be ultimate hope or whatever Nagito expected to happen. Everyone lives happily ever after, at least according to Nagito. Except there's one issue. The students do manage to figure out who Nagito was trying to single out as the traitor, the odd one out in this entire scenario. As part of the investigation, Hajime finds a suspicious diary in Nanami's house. This diary depicts the moment Hajime was about to enter the final dead room back in chapter 4. Problem is, only one person was around to witness that. Said person being Chiaki, meaning Chiaki has some type of connection with Nanami, meaning she is the traitor. Even with Nanami's attempt at denying any ties to Chiaki, it's too little, too late, and so she gets the axe. This loose explanation doesn't do this trial justice, and if you're watching this without having experienced it yourself, there's still plenty here that makes this for a compelling ride to watch unravel. There is something to be said on how the trial that involves the death of arguably the two most popular characters in the franchise is still so beloved that people just look past that. You would think it would suck to see your favorite character die, but since their death is part of such a great trial, you can kind of forget about it. So yeah, Chiaki was the traitor as she was working alongside Nanami as agents of the Future Foundation, which at this point is known to be the true name of that supposed World Ender group. Agents to maintain peace and foster friendship amongst all the students. Not outright said here, but heavily implied, is that Nanami and Chiaki are AI, bringing me to that huge thing I spoiled myself on, as this entire game has been a simulation.
I see you don't have a lifeguard here at your beach.
I'm not at the beach, this is a...
Do you understand why I found it so annoying learning this game took place in a simulation? Seeing these characters die, their struggles day to day, meaningful character interactions, all had far less of an impact on me knowing it wasn't real. Of course, none of it is real, it is a game after all. But stories in fiction can still hold weight to those experiencing them. We grow attached to these characters, their emotions, their journeys, etc. It's why the "it was all a dream" trope sucks. Playing this game and knowing at the end of the day they will all wake up and move on wasn't something I would have wanted to know. This entire discussion is actually something that will be even more relevant in a future video, but I'll just leave it at that. I do have to acknowledge Danganronpa 2 does present consequences for these virtual deaths on how it says all the students who died, due to the nature of the simulation, are not only kept alive in a comatose state, unsure if they can be fully woken up. This I didn't know until the game revealed it in the 6th trial, but a big spoiler ahead for anyone not past Danganronpa 2. Like seriously, if you're watching this, you only play the first 2 games, this is a big spoiler for a future entry. It's gonna give you enough time to fast forward. But I did know all of the characters would come back, having seen some footage of the Danganronpa 3 anime. So this was basically rendered pointless. If it weren't for that, then I would say learning Danganronpa 2 is one big simulation isn't that big of a deal, since the game does present these serious consequences at the very end. Chapter 6 has us gaining to the mysterious Hopespeed Academy on the island. As trippy and fanservicey as all of this is, this portion of the game is somewhat underwhelming if you played the first game already, especially right before this one. To compensate for people who perhaps hadn't played Danganronpa 1 going into this, the investigation for the final trial is one big recap episode. Compare that to the final investigation of Danganronpa 1, where every clue was something new. A lot of your time here will be reminders of what happened in that first game. It is all important for how this last trial plays out, but it does come at that cost. This final trial reveals that the entire game was an experiment by the Future Foundation to rehabilitate all the Ultimate Despairs through this simulation called the Neo World Program. At some point before the events of this game, they had been influenced by Junko, something foreshadowed by Mikan's odd behavior. Looking at the game's subtitle, you can now understand why it's called Goodbye Despair. The original Japanese subtitle does translate to Farewell Despair Academy, which maybe isn't as literal of what it entails about the game's events, but either way you could maybe read it as some subtle foreshadowing. As to why or how Hajime, a reserve corps student with no talent, got wrapped up in this mess, the final reveal is how he's the end result of the Hope Cultivation Plan, a secret experiment conducted by Hope's Tree Academy, which turned Hajime into Izuru Kamakura. Essentially, a superhuman with every possible talent as an artificially created ultimate hope. This backfired once Junko got a hold of him and turned him into her pawn, something covered by the Danganronpa 3 anime. At some point between capture and the events of this game, Izuru installed an AI version of Junko as a virus into the Neo World program, explaining Monokuma's sudden appearance back in the prologue. As much as all of this is to take in, Nagito did heavily foreshadow this with a certain line back in chapter 4. Even if you didn't exactly know what he was referring to, you should have had your suspicions about Hajime by that point. While Junko does serve as the figurative final boss once again, you could argue that you were the true mastermind all along, which I think is a really cool twist. Which brings me to what I said way earlier about this game blurring the line between hope and despair. Like with the previous game, Junko's doom and gloom gets a hold of everyone due to the ultimatum she presents. Either the remaining students can graduate without a problem, but in turn all of their classmates revert back to ultimate despair, or they force a shutdown, removing Junko, but they forget their memories upon graduating, and their classmates likely remain comatose. No matter what you pick, somebody's getting f***ed by your decision. Last time, Junko's ultimatum only affected our remaining students, since, well, everyone else was dead. Like, really, for realsies, not in a you die in the game, you die in real life type of dead. If Makoto and gang chose to be trapped in Hope's Tree Academy forever, only they would have to suffer those consequences. If they chose to leave, same thing. You chose to head into this hell world, figure it out. The hope Makoto presented was that the unknown lying in front of them offered more possibilities than giving up and being guaranteed safety within their prison. As scary as it might be to face the world head on, you can't just give up. Here, you do get to leave, but no matter what, your classmates will suffer some type of negative consequences, and depending on the choice, so will you. There's no hope like last time. Someone will have to suffer here, and that is the dilemma Hajime and the remaining students have to figure out. This is why I said Nagito is emblematic of this game's story. He believes in hope, but not without despair. It's not like in the first game, where the divide between hoping for a better future and the despair of giving up and staying in Hope's Tree Academy forever is clear-cut. Things have gotten messy, just as life always does. Sometimes, shit is just f***ed, and you have to deal with that harsh reality of life and just find a way to power through. The students initially give up and refrain from picking either outcome, where Junko then presents them a false happy existence. It's the blue pill from the Matrix. You get to live here forever, going on with your false life with no knowledge of what truly lies out there. And like the Matrix, that doesn't make for an interesting outcome, so that illusion is quickly broken. It's here where Chiaki appears before Hajime, motivating him to pick for himself. Yes, the options presented bear massive consequences, but you just have to pick what you want and hope it just all works out. You've come this far, why give up now? In a way, it is like the previous game, where the future of them exiting this world, forgetting their memories, and potentially incapacitating their classmates is still better than them giving up and staying in La La Land forever. That gamble being what they ultimately decide on. The game ends as the remaining students admit their fear of what is to come, further nailing that point of facing that uncertainty no matter what. Our returning characters from the previous game, which I've neglected to mention, chat as they implied this was all Makoto's idea to rehabilitate the ultimate despairs. An idea that would land him in some trouble, once again foreshadowing the Danganronpa 3 anime.
Putting on my serious critical thinking video essayist hat on, I would feel obligated to say Danganronpa 2 has the superior plot compared to Danganronpa 1. Thematically, it turns what was a basic good versus evil type of thing into something more by presenting this messy gray area between the two ideals. Trials now have a lot more going on. Sure, they might have a bit too much fluff at times, but overall they are more interesting and also harder to pinpoint the killer going into them. Like, seriously, in the first game, I knew who the killer was going into like half the trials. That's like half of the appeal of these games, come on. Danganronpa 2 does this much better. Characters, I haven't really talked about them yet, but I will say now that they are overall more enjoyable / less annoying. There are less moments in this game where, for the lack of a better word, I found myself cringing at what was going on or being said. Those moments are still here, don't get me wrong, I wish they weren't, but I would say they're less often compared to Danganronpa 1. The final reveal about all of this being one big therapy session in the form of the Matrix, I think is also just more interesting compared to that of the first game. Oh, we have Amnesia? Who could have seen that coming? Oh, Junko's the bad guy? Yeah, man, I found it weird that this character that dies 2 hours into the game has so much fan art and merchandise and anime figures. It's almost like she's the mastermind. She didn't actually die 2 hours into the game. That was Mikuro Ikusawa, her sister, the 16th student, the ultimate despair. Watch out for her! Did you know Mikuro was the 16th student? You didn't? Buddy, where were you? Kyoko told you like 5 times. Did you not listen? Kyoko told you like 5 times that Mukuro was the 16th student, the ultimate despair. Watch out for her. But yeah, but the actual final reveal, like, oh, the game was caused by a post-apocalypse caused by a teenage girl because anime game? Sure, you got me there, Danganronpa 1. That actually was kind of huge. I get why people like Danganronpa 2 more. I've gone on, what, 30, 40 minutes going on about why it's a better game than Danganronpa 1? But still, I like Danganronpa 1 more. Why? Danganronpa 1 has more Kyoko than Danganronpa 2. So really, what's the better game? It's Danganronpa 1. Fuck you. I know I'm like showing off all my anime figures again. But it's my channel, so I get to do what I want. Anyway, that's enough about the story. Let's go. This thing's like dusty. I need to like dust my rooms, like for real. Damn Kyoko. What was I saying? Oh yeah, that's enough about the story. Let's move on to other miscellaneous crap related to this game. Damn, girl.
As part of the 1-2 Reload collection, like with completing Danganronpa 1, completing Danganronpa 2 unlocks its own part dating sim, part resource manager side mode. Small correction to my last video, I thought Island mode came with the game since its original release, but it appears that's not the case. It was first added as part of this collection. Let me know if that's right since I'm going off the Danganronpa wiki. If you watched my Danganronpa 1 video, I did a more than necessary, thorough explanation of this side mode, but if you haven't seen it, I'll do a brief recap. This is an alternate reality where the killing game never happens and you instead farm resources and forge friendships with your classmates to graduate. The most notable thing here are the trip tickets you earn, which lead to some fanservice-y moments where you effectively go on dates with your favorite characters. It's cute, it's quirky, and I'm only going to bother 100%ing this mode again if I ever feel truly desperate to platinum this game. For one playthrough, it's fine, but full completion is a chore. No thanks. Completely exclusive to Danganronpa 2, however, is another side mode focused on Usami, this one available from the beginning. Here she fights the various mono beasts and their minions, or whatever these things are supposed to be. In the context of the story, it's this that allows the students to explore new islands that would otherwise be blocked by those giant robots. Which is very nice of Usami to do. I just wish her game were a little less mind-numbing. It reminded me of a boring version of Pokemon Ranger, if that makes any sense to those of you who have played those games. I appreciate Danganronpa 2 for adding all this side stuff, which are decent distractions, at least on a first playthrough. V3 would continue this with its own weird side modes, which I'll cover when that day comes. It may not always be a hit, but hey, it's nice to have. On the subject of things which did not need to be added, Danganronpa 2 has a Tamagotchi-like minigame where you can raise pets. This one isn't a proper side mode, just an extra option on your handbook. You can give them presents, clean up their shit, and see what they evolve into. None of the characters acknowledge this, not even the character in the cast, who you would think would have something to say about having a game on their handbook, unless it's only exclusive to Hajime, but at this point I'm overthinking something which has no real purpose outside some exclusive skills and an achievement. I just find it really random such a thing is in this game, but I suppose one should expect randomness from this series. Our final unlockable piece of content here is the Danganronpa If light novel. I already did an overview of it in my previous video, so here's a timestamp for it if you care to hear my thoughts about it, if you haven't done so already. Like its predecessor, Danganronpa 2 has a manga adaptation, but not until fact-checking some information for this section did I realize it has not one, not two, not even three, but 4 adaptations, all from different characters' point of view. Here I was thinking this section would be 2 sentences long, but nope. There's a standard manga adaptation that speedruns through the game as expected, one where it's entirely from Nagito's point of view, one from Kazuichi's, and one from Chiaki's. Only the first 2 versions are available in English, with the latter 2 Japanese only. I'm not sure if fan translations exist for those, but I will at least check out the Nagito one at some point. And also, like last time, there's a stage play for Danganronpa 2. I didn't watch it cause frankly, I don't care. I'm sure it's just as quirky as the last one. If you want more Danganronpa 2, hey, knock yourself out.
Finally, here is the character tier list portion of the video. I do this because I think it's fun to do, everyone loves tier lists, and it also serves as an opportunity to talk about characters that I otherwise don't really get to talk about while covering the story. Here are the tiers, gonna go in that order, and then with the surviving students from least favorite to favorite. I'm only going to take into account their depictions in this game. If they show up again in a future entry, then I'll consider changing your placement.
Actually, before starting this, I have to acknowledge how many copycat characters there are when comparing the cast here to the previous. We have a character that doesn't remember their talent, an ultimate lucky student, Byakuya, a dark-skinned athletic girl carrying large ballistics, the big muscles character who's friends with them, the asshole who doesn't want to get along, the weird-looking character who's a weirdo, and I think that covers the main ones. With some of these, having pre-established expectations for what role in the story these characters play do make for interesting outcomes. In the first game, the asshole character in Byakuya never completely warms up to the rest of the cast. Here, Fuyuhiko does a 180 in his character following Pekko's death. He wants to make amends, having just lost his best friend and almost losing his own life in the process. Maybe I shouldn't spend my precious limited time on Earth being an asshole to everyone. In other cases, like with Aoi and Akane, those initial similarities not only lead to nowhere, it was them basically copying and pasting old characters. Just an interesting observation, a trend that in some way continues even into V3. Byakuya, aka the Imposter, is a weird place to start because he's hard to nail down. He's a lot like Junko / Mukuro from the first game, where we have a character pretending to be someone else, and we only get small glimpses of their actual character through the few interactions we have with them. For the small window of time we get with them, he leaves a strong impression, and I think if he stuck around longer, he'd be an interesting character to see develop. Because of that, plus him being a mellowed out Byakuya, putting him in good tier. Teruteru also leaves a strong impression, just not in a good way. Everything you need to know about why I hate him is exemplified with your first encounter with him.
Word around the office is you've got a fat cock.
Yes, I do.
I've got a fat cock too. Maybe we should rub our fat cocks together sometime. Maybe a little oil. 2 fat cocks. Together. Oil.
As a fellow food lover myself who enjoys cooking, Teruteru is the type of character I could have easily liked, but is instead ruined by Danganronpa writers' insistence on pushing annoying character traits. There are ways to make Teruteru a ladies' man while even incorporating his love of cooking into it. Maybe some of the girls express interest in his cooking or his food, and he uses that as a way to make conversation or even be flirty. But instead, they just went ahead and pushed it into the absolute worst direction. Easy despised here. Mahiru starts the trend of me not having particularly strong feelings for any of the Danganronpa 2 girls besides one exception. Right off the bat, I'm docking points away from her because she's best friends with Hiyoko, but never calls her out on any of her bullshit. If I were friends with someone who's constantly rude to people, including actively bullying them, well, 1, I wouldn't be friends with them in the first place, but 2, I would at least call them out on it. Besides that, Mahiru is a surprisingly vanilla character by Danganronpa standards. She's not this weirdo with exaggerated character traits. She just really enjoys photography. Her free time events do make me appreciate her just a bit more, but ultimately I think I have to put her at the whatever tier. If it weren't for the whole Hiyoko thing, I'd place her a tier above. Pekko, purely design-wise, is easily my favorite character in this game. Silver hair and red eyes make for a very powerful combination, which I find visually appealing. Character-wise, she initially falls somewhat flat up until the second trial. Her dynamic with Fuyuhiko is quite interesting and develops just enough in that small window right before her execution to always get a reaction out of me. I also like doing her free time events which further flesh her out, so that is a plus. She goes in good tier for me. I really do like her. Ibuki is a bit one note, but not in a bad way. She's fun and goofy. It's a bit depressing the last time we see her is her acting the polar opposite with these creepy doll-like mannerisms. Don't really have much to say here. Easy like, you don't always need a deep character for me to like you. Hiyoko though, is easily my least favorite character out of all 3 main games. I cannot stand her attitude, her free time events don't make me like her more, she's a and frankly deserves to get killed by Mikan. She had it coming, that's all I'm saying. I don't even care if her potential development got cut short. Mikan is much like Toko from the first game, where I just feel bad for her. A girl needs a hug and some therapy. Unlike Toko, who gets strong development in Ultra Despair Girls, Mikan sadly doesn't end up getting that same luxury. As it stands, I do like her. Maybe more accurate to say I want to like her. The weird fanservice stuff with her is a bit conflicting cause I'm not sure if it's the writers being dumb again or intentional on Mikan's part to get some easy attention on her. She also says some concerning stuff in her free time events. I'll overlook it and place her in like, honestly, a character I would have loved to see get some strong development. Nekomaru is alright. His talent of team manager feels incredibly underutilized, and I sometimes forget what his talent is even supposed to be. Him constantly talking about shit is also weird. I don't know who thought that was a good idea to write that in. He's another JoJo reference, I guess bonus points for that. I don't know how I didn't realize that until a second playthrough. Whatever tier. Gundam being an animal guy gets big bonus points for me from the get-go. He's a Chuny type of character, which is a bit annoying, but he rebounds thanks to the forced trial, as explained earlier. I'll put him in like tier, plus at least the English dub, his voice is really cool. Nagito, I think I've said everything I want to say about him just by covering the story. He makes this game far more interesting than it would have been without him. Easy love tier. Oh, and let me use this as an excuse to insert this one clip of him at the hospital. You see, the funny part here is that he has the Lyme disease. He's lying here. You can interpret this moment however you want.
In Heartbeat, Hinata was halfway down Komaeda's throat. Oh, they're back to kissing. Whoa! Oh my god!
I was so happy to be debated. I'm Omega lol.
If you asked me my thoughts on Chiaki prior to the second playthrough, I would have told you I didn't care for her at all. I liked her, she was fine, but she didn't leave a strong impression on me. That has since changed. She is by no means my definitive best girl of this game or anything, but I do like her way more now. A large part of that is that final conversation between her and Hajime in the 6th trial. I made it a point for me to write down in my notes for this game, and I quote, "Also, damn, that last line between Hajime and Chiaki, tears." Putting her up in good tier. I am aware of those people who really don't like her. Trust me, I get why. I was closer to that camp before. Her lack of any real development and being the definition of waifu bait is a real criticism, but I don't really care. Usami/Nanami technically dies in the 5th trial, but not really. But I'll still talk about her next. She's cute, she's wholesome. I love her little speech before her execution. Her theme song is my favorite track in this game, and I want a plush of her. All the way up and love them tier. I don't even care if her minigame is shit. Of the surviving students, my least favorite among them is a toss-up between Kazuichi and Akane. I have less to say about Kazuichi, so I'll get him out of the way. Frankly, he's not bad. I don't hate him. He's just brought down by his obsession with Sonya. It would have been really easy for him to finally take the hint, probably after the 4th trial, and vastly improve his character by giving him an arc there. Instead, the writers kept the bit going, which ultimately brings him down. Whatever tier. The reason I'm initially so against Akane is that comparing her to Aoi, they are more or less the same character, for reasons brought up earlier, and also in that they're obsessed with eating and not exactly the brightest in the room. And while Aoi frequently brings up her ultimate talent of swimming, much like Nekomaru, I forget Akane's talent is supposed to be that of a gymnast, considering how little it's brought up. For the sake of fairness for some of the characters whose opinion I'm not the most concrete on, I read up their free time events to see if that can sway me. Doing this with Akane sheds good light on her character, even if it means reading some uncomfortable details about her, and I do appreciate that compared to Aoi, whose free time events didn't do much of anything to develop her, Akane's actually adds to her, Having said all this, I still don't really care for her that much, and being a borderline copy-paste doesn't help at all. If Aoi didn't exist, I think I'd like her a bit more. She goes in whatever tier because I can't find myself to place her any higher, but as a consolation prize, I'm knocking Aoi down to like her because in retrospect, her free time events are weak, as they could have done more to flesh her out. Sonya, honestly, whatever I said for Ibuki, I can say here. She wasn't annoying, was occasionally useful and a voice of reason, and I overall liked her presence. Not much else I can really say. Like tier. I already went over Fuyuhiko a bit, and there's not much else I'll add to that. It's surprising a literal criminal, with him being a Yakuza member and all, is somehow one of the most likable characters in the entire series by the end of this game. This is proof that Danganronpa writers can make good character arcs, but for some reason just choose not to. Easily loved him here. Make that 2 in a row, as Hajime goes right up there with them without a doubt. Again, I've already talked about him enough, so there's not much more for me to add. Yeah, no, I actually do have more to say here, I'm sorry. In editing, I remembered this moment at the start of chapter 2, where Nagito's rambling about being born with talent, and how ultimates are essentially predetermined at birth, instead of them reaching that point thanks to practice or working hard. This goes against what the ending of the game says, on how Hajime and friends, despite their bad circumstances, are determined to make a better future for themselves. Basically, that no matter where you start off from, you can be successful. I also want to tie this into the moment everyone finds out Hajime isn't an ultimate, on how they don't really care. Hajime is their friend, it doesn't matter if he's an ultimate or just some random normie reserved for a student. I don't know. I don't even know what I'm trying to say here. If Danganronpa 1 was all about ultimates, with even Makoto rising up to be ultimate hope by the end, then Danganronpa 2 has a theme of not needing to be special to be happy with yourself. Something also seen in Ultra Despair Girls, in fact. Just wanted to throw these thoughts I had in here, not gonna ramble on any longer. He has more going on as a protagonist than Makoto, and that's not even counting the whole Izuru Kamakura thing. Him being ultimate hope that was used for despair is, I guess, also very emblematic of this game's ending now thinking about it. You could say he represents that gray area much like Nagito, just in a different way, as expressed in that final trial. And that is my tier list for all the characters in this game. I've always been of the opinion that with every game, the quality of the cast grows, and you can already see the trend here. Feel free to share your opinions on my great/terrible taste down in the comments.
Having said that, that concludes my thoughts on Danganronpa 2. As I've gone on long enough, this game is an overall improvement compared to the first. There's even a quote here on the back of the box. You can see it right here. There we go. Did it focus yet? I don't know. I'll read it to you anyway. It says, "Everything a sequel should be" by Hardcore Gamer on Danganronpa 2 Goodbye Despair. You are correct, Hardcore Gamer. This is everything a sequel should be. And until I get to V3 again, I won't seriously argue against those who say this is the best in the series. Next time, I'll be covering not the best, arguably the worst, but most definitely the most controversial game in the series, Ultra Despair Girls. Ooh, everyone's favorite. Ooh, the best game of the series. I don't know when exactly I'll be covering it. It'll be sometime this year, I can promise that. It's just with the schedule I have laid out. It can either come out during the summer or during the fall, depending on when I choose to start working on this. But yeah, not to ramble too long, the development of this video, the Danganronpa 2 video, was a complete shit show because it got delayed 4 times due to Pokemon related reasons that I'll flash on screen, which made it very awkward when I got around to writing the script because I finished the game in June. I started the playthrough in January, but I finished it in June. And the first final draft of the script was done in November, and then that script got edited once again in March of this year. So that's over half a year that had gone by since I had last finished the game. So certain story details I had just forgotten, or I just couldn't quite remember how it went down. So I had to refresh my memory on those, which just made the script a bit harder to write. So I will try to avoid doing that for this video, and really any other future videos, you know. If I'm gonna start working on that, and I'm kind of let anything else distract me. But yeah, that's the end of the video. As always, thank you so much for watching if you made it this far. I hope this was better than my Danganronpa 1 video, because I really don't like that. I really don't like that video. I think it's alright. Maybe it's just me having high expectations for myself. It's like, but hey, if you liked it, good for you. If you haven't watched it, maybe you'll enjoy it. I mean, it's not a pretty lengthy video. But yeah, I don't really have anything else to say. This is where like my script runs out. It actually ran out like a couple of nights ago. I guess just cut to me being back on the laptop screen. I'll maybe like edit the audio. I'll do like wave goodbye, or I'll do like funny dances, or like dabs. Whoa! I don't know. Bye.